Maybe not your blood, but your breath, your silence, your fight. I can share those.
Together is the word I feared most.
No man ever stayed, she admitted. I'm not here to stay, I'm here to stand with you. Buffalo, Wyoming Territory, December 1884. The snow had a way of softening every hard edge in the valley and sharpening every ache inside my ribs. At first light I stepped out of the cabin my father built with his one good shoulder and a stubborn prayer, and the cold was so clean it scraped. The cottonwoods stood like pale sentinels along the coulee, their beadwork of frost catching the low sun. Beneath that white hush, where the ground dips and the reeds remember summer, three hidden waters meet and murmur under stone. My father called it the medicine mouth. He said if I stood quiet enough, the earth would speak up through the bones of my feet. I tried. Lord, I tried. But grief is a louder river. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here. Blue padded ahead, shoulders rolling, one ear cocked, the other split in a crescent from some old fight. The horses steamed in the corral 14 heads, 14 heartbeats. I counted the way a lonely woman counts the minutes, just to prove time still moves. 1, 2, 3, 14. The bay mare breathed my name in a soft fog. I told her I would be fine, and the lie sat in my mouth like a coin. Wind crawled down from the bighorn smelling of iron and pine pitch. Then the valley did that thing it does before trouble goes still in your ears but quick in your blood. The willows twitched. A gray smear detached itself from the cattails and lifted its narrow head. A second shape slid after it, then a third, lean as hunger made into fur. Wolves in early winter are thorns with breath. The mares bunched. I felt the rifle's familiar weight, find my shoulder like a remembered hand. The front sight settled on the shoulder of the nearest wolf. Its eyes held mine, yellow and patient, as if it had all day to argue with me about what belonged to whom. A shot cracked from the east, clean and sure. Snow puckered behind the second wolf. It folded as if someone had pulled a string from its spine. The others turned to shade, feet making no sound my human ears could hold. The echo went running out toward the ridge and came back hollow, like an empty pan. Blue made a sound that was not a bark and not a growl, just a question. I did not lower the rifle. Out of the narrow stand of aspen came a rider, hat crusted with rime, mouth set thin against the cold. He kept his horse to a careful jog and stopped a respectful 15 yards from my fence. He raised his empty hand. The other pressed his side, where something dark had bled through his coat in the exact shape of a handprint. "Ma'am," he said. Wind took the steam of his words. "Didn't mean to spook your stock." "You didn't," I said, though my heart was a bird against a window. "You're bleeding." "Seems I am." His eyes were the color of creek water in March, not mercy or winter exactly, just something that keeps going. He looked at my rifle, then at Blue, then back at me. "Claw," he said, "or wire. Hard to tell when you're busy, not dying." "Dismount," I told him. "You fall from there, the ground will finish what the wolves couldn't." He slid down like a man taught to hide, hurt the way other men hide money. Up close, I could see the salt in his beard and the way pain had made a small house in the corners of his eyes. He kept his hands where I could see them. I kept the muzzle where he could see it. "Name's Ethan Walker," he offered. "Headed for Fort McKinney when the weather and the Lord allow." "Ahioka Redfeather," I said, and the syllables were a string I pulled tight to keep from coming apart. "This is Crow land, whether the town map prints it or not. My father said paper can't own what remembers you when you're gone." I tipped my chin toward the lean-to. "Come, you'll sit, you'll be cleaned. Then we'll see if you're the kind a night can live with." I led him past the corral where the mares watched us with the old, resigned interest of creatures who know people are always inventing reasons to bleed. In the lean-to, the breath of hay and horseflesh made a small, homely summer. I set the lantern high so light would be kind and not cruel. He peeled his coat back. The shirt under it had a slice 4 inches long, clean, the way a bad day opens a careful life. I poured whiskey. It ran cold, then burned hot. He didn't flinch. Men who don't flinch in the small pains have learned to respect the big ones. "You've doctor's hands," he said, watching the neatness I couldn't help. "Or a healer's. My father was both, in the way our people measure such things." I pressed comfrey and yarrow into a paste, the smell green and bitter, the way hope smells when you grind it down to make it useful. He said, "White coats learn names. Medicine learns listening." I wrapped him in clean linen, the last my father's sister sent before the letter that said she would send no more. He looked at my face with something that wasn't pity and wasn't curiosity. "I used to be a doctor," he said, and the confession made a dull sound against the boards. "War made my head a house I didn't want to live in. Wood listens quieter than blood." "Wood burns," I said. "Blood remembers. Both are stubborn." I tied the bandage, the knot snug and small. "You'll live. You'll ache. The weather will win the argument, as it does." That made the corner of his mouth think of a smile, and then decide it couldn't afford one. "Wind keeps good books," he answered. Outside, the sky grayed down 2 shades, and the air went granular. Snow has its own time. You either yield or you break into it like a fool. I thought of the men from town who'd ridden out last week with their polite threats and their new boots, smiling with all their teeth to show how civilized they were. They said surveyors would come in spring with sticks and numbers. They said railroad. They said progress. Progress always has a way of meaning, you move. "It'll be dark by 5, I said. "You'll freeze where you stand if you don't step inside. Town gossips can pickle themselves in their own brine. I won't leave a man to die for their sake." I opened the cabin door. The old latch my father carved out of cottonwood clicked like a small bone being set. "Bring your saddlebags. Leave your pride on the peg." The cabin met him with heat and the low tick of the iron stove. The shelves held jars, willow bark stacked like thin coins, dried peppermint, choke cherries wrinkled to sweetness, a twist of sage for births and deaths. On a nail, my mother's pendant hung when it wasn't cooling the hollow above my heart. A small silver round etched with the lines of running water. A river you could wear when you needed to remember where you came from. "You live alone," he said, not as a question but as a mercy. "I live with the dead and with work," I answered. "Sometimes the dead are kinder." I ladled rabbit stew into a tin bowl meat I took at 20 paces on a still day when my hands were steadier than my thoughts. I set cornbread beside it and poured coffee black enough to argue with. He ate like a man who remembers his mother watching and swallowed like he had a debt to hunger he was paying off a spoon at a time. "Thank you," he said, without dressing the words up. "You can thank me by staying alive past dawn," I said. "Men from town will ride out again. Silas Blackthorne with his fine gloves, Dr. Collins with his thin mouth and his heavy bag. They'll call this valley empty because it doesn't show up on their papers the way they like. They'll call me stubborn because I won't call my mother's bones a survey line." "What will you call it?" he asked, voice quiet enough not to startle anything sacred. "Home," I said, and the word hurt. Hunger, prayer, the place where 3 waters meet under stone and the old ones come when I ask them right. My father taught me to face the sleeping bison rock at noon, count 60 paces to the badger mound, and listen. He said the earth is thin there, and the plants grown under that breath carry more than their names. I looked at my hands. The cracks across my knuckles were small rivers. He said this place chooses who tends it. He died asking me to say yes. He set the spoon down like the bowl held something tender. "I've seen men claim land with ink and guns," he said. "I've not seen it claim them back the way you mean. Maybe it's time I learned a different counting." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you'll leave when the road dries." He looked at me long, the kind of looking that doesn't take or pry, just receives. "I've been leaving a long time," he said. "I'm tired in places that never warmed, no matter how many fires I built." The stove clicked. The light faded to that blue that happens just before dark drops like a trap. I topped the fire and brought out the good quilt my aunt sent years ago, the one with crooked stars that always seemed to be leaning toward one another and never arriving. I gave him my father's cot in the corner, the cotton ticking thin where death pressed a hollow. "He went soft," I told Ethan, voice thinning. Said the old men came up out of the river and opened the door. He smiled when the wind came under it. "I hope for a door," he said, almost to himself. Behind the screen, I unpinned my hair and brushed it with the slow strokes that keep my breath from climbing into my throat. I slid the pendant's cold weight back to my skin where it belongs. In the dark, Blue settled with a sigh that matched the weather in my chest. Outside, a coyote called twice and waited for a cousin who never answered. That's what I sounded like inside my own head most nights. 2 calls, no echo. "Thank you," Ethan said into the dark, like a man telling the night it could keep his secrets if it wanted. "For what?" My voice went hoarse where the day had scraped it. "For opening your door when it would have been easier to leave it shut," he said. "For not letting the town own your mercy. I didn't know what to do with that. So I tucked it under my tongue like a black currant and let it sweeten what it could." "Don't make me sorry," I said. "That's all I ask." "I won't," he answered. It landed between us like a small, careful oath. Sometime after midnight, Blue lifted his head and hummed the lowest note a dog can make. I was awake before my eyes were open, my hand already on the Henry's worn stock. Ethan's feet found the floorboards without sound. The cabin held its breath with us. Through the shutter came the slow, deliberate rhythm of hooves 2, maybe 3, not hurrying. Men who believe the world is theirs do not hurry. The cold had fallen hard. My breath hung in front of my lips in the dark. I could feel the knot in my chest pulse 12 times while the hoofbeats came closer. The latch was suddenly a living thing under my palm, my father's hand inside the wood. I thought of every woman in town who had looked past me on purpose. I thought of every prayer I had said into the reeds until my voice went hoarse. I thought of my father's last words, "Listen with your feet, little one," and tried to hear anything under the dread. "This is my door," I told Ethan. "I know," he said. The knock came 3 times, not courteous, not cruel, just sure, and all the winter in the world stood up to watch whether I would open. I set my shoulders the way I set broken bones, gentle as I could, firm as I had to. Then I lifted the latch. When I lifted the latch, the wind stepped in like a hungry cousin and pawed at the coals. No man stood on the stoop, only the dark stitched with snow and the breath of horses out beyond the cottonwoods. The hoofbeats had bent away at the last, as if the valley itself had turned their bridles. The knock was the loose shutter where the bottom hinge has begged me for a nail these last 6 weeks. I laughed once the sound thin as tin, and shut the door against my own dread. Ethan said nothing, just fed the stove with 2 splits of cottonwood, the way you feed a skittish colt. Slow, sure, no sudden pride. Blue settled again, a warm crescent at my feet. I set the rifle back in its rack. In the sigh after a fright, a room can feel twice as empty and twice as close. "False alarm," I told him, and the lie and the truth live together in the same words. The valley plays at ghosts when it's this cold. "I've known hospitals do the same," he said. "At 3 in the morning, everything is a ghost until it is not." 3 in the morning. I mark time too carefully these days, hours and halves. The 12 ticks between a breath and the next. After my father died, I carved a notch in the inner doorframe every Sunday to make the week stand still long enough to look at. There are 47 of them now, a little ladder for a small hand that will not be born. "Sit," I said, and pointed to the chair closest to the stove. "Let me see what the weather has done to your bandage." He moved like a man trained to obey good sense when it wore a woman's voice. The linen was already blooming dark at one edge. I fetched the basin, warmed water with a splash from the kettle, set out yarrow, comfrey, a twist of spruce pitch I keep in a tin. The old motions calmed me the way prayer does other people. He watched my hands the way I used to watch my father's, close, hungry, as if you could learn a person by memorizing their knuckles. The cut ran 4 inches along his ribs, clean as a paper slice, the edges ridged but not angry. I cleaned, dried, pressed the green paste on with the back of a spoon, binding it snug when the heat from his skin gave the herbs their sweet, bitter breath. "You don't shake," he said softly. "Not even when you think you do." "The shakes come after," I said, "when there's no one left to serve." I tucked the end of the bandage with the small twist my father taught me, so it holds even at a gallop. He used to say our hands should be a place where pain can sit down, even if we hate it for coming. Ethan's mouth made that trying not to be a smile again and then thought better of the effort. I know that saying in a different coat. He glanced at the shelves at Willow, at Peppermint, at the row of washed bottles we keep for what we can save. I left surgery because my hands forgot the chair you speak of. Everything shook except what I told to be still. What was the last thing you cut? I asked. It's a cruel question. I asked it anyway because I live on a land that tells the truth to your teeth. A boy, he said, and the words sat on the table between us like a stone you cannot lift. 16, gray coat, bullet lodged where we could not touch it without waking death. He lived until he didn't. I left the city because the dead in my hands began to follow me to the rude little house where I slept. They sat in my chair and took my spoon and stared like I'd failed them personally. You didn't, I said. I did enough for my hands to believe it, he said. Hands are poor juries. We drank coffee because there is nothing else to do with a night that won't end. He told me Philadelphia in winter smells like coal and horse piss and boiled apples. I told him snow here has flavors iron when the river talks under it, sage when the wind comes from the west, ash when the cottonwoods remember fire. He told me tents with cut canvas let the screams out and the heat, too. I told him a woman alone in town lets the looks in, and the words, too. When the lamplight falls right, a room fills with people you once had. My father sat at the edge of my vision, rubbing resin between his thumb and forefinger, that little tacky shine he got when he was thinking. My mother was the weight of the silver round at my throat, cool against my skin, her waterlines pressed into me. I heard the old crow words Yellowbird taught me once when I was small, Ichi kabiwa, be gentle, Axpi, breathe, and said them to myself like a girl remembering where the path leaves the willows. Somewhere after the second cup I asked, "Do you pray?" and hated myself for wanting his yes. He looked at the stove. I used to. Then the men on cots outweighed the prayers and the scale broke. These days I talk to wood, to horses, to water when it lets me hear it. It feels less like lying. Water doesn't lie, I said, but it leaves when it's tired of you. I ran my thumb along the cup's lip. The priest at the agency said I should choose church or my mother's pipe smoke, hymns or the old songs, as if a throat can carry only one tune in a life. What did you choose? I chose to disappoint him, I said, and the first real smile in many weeks got past me before I could lock the door. He smiled back, quick, human, almost startled. It made him someone I might have known at 16 if life had not used us for different chores. He coughed, then the movement tugged the bandage and a flash of white sat down behind his eyes. Hurts? I asked. Reminds, he said. I banked the stove at last. The night thinned to glass. Outside, the horse's hooves thudded slow once, then stilled. Blue twitched in some warm chase. I lay down in my bed and listened to the sound of another person's breathing in the same room. It is a medicine and a grief. You remember how your father used to stall between breaths near the end, and how you counted in your head to keep him here. 1, 2, 3, breathe for me, and how you still count for empty air, as if love could make lungs out of wanting. I slept a little the way a shallow creek does, never all the way under. Dreams came like people on the far side of a fire. Faces, nothing more. I woke before the light and pushed the shutter with 2 fingers so it wouldn't crack the quiet. The sky was that thin pearl gray. That means the cold is going to rise and do its chores. The valley lay with its ribs showing. Wolves stitched the far hill with their small dark marks. One had stood right at the fence and watched the horses. The prince told me the way a hand on a cheek does. Inside, I stoked the stove. Coffee hissed its small, mean comfort. Ethan's eyes opened with a soldier's quickness. He tried to sit fast and then remembered he had a side. The almost smile returned, pained and honest. You heal like a man who's had practice, I said. I hurt like one too, he said. We ate cornmeal mush with dried berries from last summer and used the last of the thick cream I traded Mrs. Rowe for willow bark when her boy's teeth went wicked on him. I told him he could help with chores or not, and meant the kindness to be true. He, being a certain breed of man, said yes before he heard the alternatives. Fine, I said, but you do what I say. Stubbornness is just pride in a cheap hat. He helped anyway, slow, careful, jaw clenched when the shovel shaft pressed his side. He broke ice out of the troughs with the back of the axe and carried it away so the horses wouldn't cut their lips. He mended a loose board on the corral with 4 nails and a patience that made me forgive him for being still here. He stood a long minute with his hand on the bay mare's neck, and the reason I liked him was not that she tolerated it, but that he did not trick himself into calling it trust. "We are on probation," he said to her, as if she could whisper what he deserved. By 8, the light was hard. Breath made its small white mistakes and blew away. I changed his bandage again, the herbs turning the sweet rot taste. That means they are making their quiet arguments under the skin. He watched my mouth this time instead of my hands. I pretended not to notice and told him about the time I took Willow and Mint down to Mrs. Proctor when fever took her little girl, and how the woman held her child tight against me as if medicine comes through skin the way sadness does. "She called me dear without seeing me," I said. "It was the kindest thing and the worst." Lee. He told me about a train platform where he said goodbye to a father who had already left, about a row house whose windows shook when the trams went by, about a Saturday market that smelled like hot chestnuts and cheap cologne and a woman's hair under rain. "It should be easy to live where the streets tell you where to put your feet," he said. "I keep walking off the map." "You came to the right country," I said. "The maps here are arguments, not promises." Lo. He sat quiet then, and his eyes did that dulling thing a man's eyes do when a bad picture comes to the wall of his skull and will not leave until it is fed. I put my palm flat on the table between us, close enough that he could choose. He put his hand on mine like he was setting down a delicate tool, not to crush or take, but to borrow steadiness for a count of 10. The scars along his knuckles matched old stories. The heat of him took a long time to stop being a surprise. "Thank you," he said. And the 2 words did an honest day's work. The sun climbed until it hit the line of cottonwoods and tried to pretend at warmth. Wind came from the west for a stretch and brought sage with it, a small absolution. I swept the cabin floor, because a woman sweeps when she doesn't know which part of herself to fix. He whittled a new peg for the shutter and set it with a mallet he made out of a chunk of elm and a stub of stubbornness. The shutter held, the house breathed easier. "Men from town will come by week's end," I said, not to frighten but because true things sour if you hoard them. "Blackthorne the banker, Collins the doctor with the thin mouth. They'll say railroad the way men say gospel when what they mean is my will. They'll call this valley unclaimed and my body troublesome. I'll be here," he said simply, and the simplicity made me angry and grateful at once. "Until I'm not needed or not wanted." "Lead?" "I don't know the difference," I said. "You will," he answered. At noon I faced the sleeping bison rock because I always do when the light is right. I counted 60 paces to the badger mound and stood still. The earth sent up cold through my soles, and under the cold a smaller warmth, like a hidden animal. When you have nothing left that will sign your name in a courthouse, you keep these private treaties, with water, with stone, with the old women whose names no ledger ever held. I stood there until my toes ached, and my eyes leaked from wind or from something else. When I came back, Ethan had made a small stool out of 2 boards and 3 pegs, and it stood humble and square by the stove, and it broke me. You live alone long enough, and any object made by a human hand to ease your living is a mercy you cannot swallow without it sticking. I touched the stool, and then my mouth, and then my chest, to thank the right things. "Late afternoon," he said, glancing at the door as if it could keep time. "Wind's shifting again." It always does. I ladled the last of yesterday's stew into the pot, stretched it with water, lied to it with herbs. We ate head, down like field hands, and let gratitude do its quiet work. Near dusk, Blue lifted his head again, and the whole room leaned toward listening. Nothing came. The shutter did not knock. The valley kept its teeth out, but the feeling sat on the threshold like a man who believes a door knows his name. I set another notch of worry into the inside of my ribs, where I keep such tallies, and straightened my shoulders, the way a woman does when she will not let her house tilt. "Tomorrow," I said, as if picking a fight with the day because it was safer than picking one with sorrow. "We haul wood. We set snares up past the willow stand. I'll show you where the coulee eats the bank, and you'll tell me if a man can persuade it to stop. We keep our feet moving until someone insists we don't." He nodded, then stood and reached for his coat and didn't say he would sleep in the barn for my reputation. We have both lost too much for that kind of theater. Good night, Ahioka, he said. Good night, Ethan. After the lamp went dark, the room went soft again, and then hard. I lay with my palm on the silver round at my throat and counted, the way I always do. Breaths, notches, names. My father's voice came the way water does through whatever small crack is left when winter tries to seal you. Listen with your feet, little one. I pressed my heel to the plank and felt the whole valley hum under the cabin like a distant drum. The shutter held, the stove ticked, the horses dreamed. And somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, farther than the sound of our two breaths and nearer than hope, a set of hooves found our trail and memorized it. By mid-morning the snow had crusted hard, sharp enough to slice a boot sole. I was stacking wood against the cabin wall when I heard hooves, not the tired rhythm of a traveler, but the clipped, practiced march of men who come to take. Blue's hackles rose before I even saw them. 2 riders broke through the cottonwoods, coats trimmed in fur, horses clean and fed on oats townfolk could afford. Silas Blackthorne sat tall in the saddle, hat set low, gloves the color of blood. His smile was the kind that cuts more than it warms. Beside him, Dr. Collins carried a satchel like it could command the world to bow. They reined in close, snow scattering from iron shoes. Well now, Blackthorne called, voice smooth as oil poured over stone. Miss Redfeather, you've built yourself quite the nest out here. His eyes drifted to Ethan, who had stepped to my side despite the fresh bandage beneath his shirt. And found yourself company, I see. This land is not mine to build or give, I answered, keeping my voice steady. It belongs to the crow who came before me, and to the waters that remember their names. Collins sniffed like I'd spoken nonsense. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his satchel, edges crisp despite the cold. According to county survey, this valley falls under unclaimed territory. By spring, the railroad will be grading through. Progress waits for no one, especially not. His eyes flicked over my braids, my mother's pendant at my throat. He didn't finish. Blackthorne leaned forward in his saddle. Sell quiet, and I'll see you're compensated fair. Stay stubborn, and you'll find the law less kind than I am. He felt Ethan stiffen beside me. She has every right to remain, he said, calm but iron through with something sharp. Blackthorne's smile thinned. And who are you to speak for her? A man who's seen what happens when paper pretends to own more than it understands, Ethan said. For a moment the valley went silent but for the horses' breathing. The air itself seemed to wait on my answer. My father's words rose up like smoke. The earth chooses who tends it. I touched the pendant at my throat. This ground has bones older than your courthouse ink, I said. Drive your stakes here, and you drive them into graves. Do you want ghosts for neighbors, Mr. Blackthorne? His face hardened, but Collins tugged his sleeve. The doctor's voice was tight. There's no need to quarrel. We'll return when spring clears the passes. They wheeled their horses. Snow sprayed like shrapnel as they rode off, leaving the air heavy with promises I knew they would keep. I was shaking when they vanished behind the ridge. Ethan reached for me, but I pulled back. Fear has its own dignity. Then another sound rose behind us, softer, older, a staff tapping against frozen ground. I turned. Yellow Bird, the eldest left of my people, stood at the edge of the cottonwoods. His hair was white as the snow, his face a map of years, eyes steady as the river mouth. He had walked miles to reach me, and the valley itself seemed to bow at his coming. You stood well, he said in Crow first, then English. But words will not be enough. Blackthorne carries hunger, and hunger carries men. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then what must I do? He tapped the earth with his staff. Beneath these hills lies the cave of medicines. Your bloodline alone can open the stone mouth. Inside rests what our healers left when soldiers burned the lodges. If you guard it, the valley will guard you. If you abandon it, the valley dies with you. The words struck like flint. Ethan's breath caught beside me, but I could not look at him. The snow hissed from the branches above, a slow shiver of the land itself. Yellow Bird placed his hand on my shoulder, heavy as the weight of generations. Daughter of Redfeather, the fight has come. You cannot walk away. And in that moment, with Blackthorn's threats still echoing and the promise of a hidden cave burning inside me, I knew the winter would not be the only enemy pressing at my door. Dawn broke brittle, a pale line of pewter above the cottonwoods, and still I hadn't slept. The words of Yellowbird had made a nest in my ribs, each syllable a thorn, a cave of medicines, sealed by blood. My blood. My father had whispered fragments of such tales when I was a child, curled under a quilt stitched with crooked stars. But I thought them only stories to keep the dark gentle. Now the dark itself was demanding proof. Ethan watched me from the stove, his face lined more from thought than from years. He didn't ask questions until the coffee was thick and black between us. What did the old man mean? I let the steam curl into my eyes, burn them clean. He spoke of a cave hidden where the ridges meet. The healers placed our remedies there when the soldiers came, so the medicines would survive even if we did not. My father never showed me the path. He said the land would open when it was ready. No. And you think it's ready now? I lifted my gaze to him, sharp. I don't think. I know. Blackthorn's hunger has teeth. If he sets rails through this valley, not only bones but spirits will scatter. The cave is the only shield left. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on knees. Then we find it. Together. The word together bent something inside me. For years I had shouldered silence alone, silence of widowed land, silence of a woman marked half invisible by town men who saw only what they chose. Now a stranger bled into my house and dared to say together, and my body trembled as if the valley itself had spoken through him. We set out at noon, when the snow softened just enough to take a print. Blue padded ahead, tail cutting the wind. Yellowbird had said only, "Face the sleeping bison. Count until your breath knows it cannot count further. And then listen." The sleeping bison rock lay crouched at the ridge, its outline heavy against the sky, as if the earth had shaped a guardian, and then let it turn to stone mid-dream. I placed my palm to its cold flank. "Grandfather," I whispered in Crow, "if you ever knew my father, open your eyes to me." The wind shifted. Sage rose faint under the snow, a ghost scent. Blue whined low, circling the base. And there, half buried in drift, was a crevice no wider than my shoulders, rimmed with ice-like teeth. Ethan crouched, lantern in hand. "A mouth," he murmured. "Yes," I said, pulse racing. "The mouth of stone." We squeezed inside, shoulders scraping, breath loud. The tunnel sloped downward, air damp, walls scored with lines that caught the lantern light, ancient handprints, spirals, the sweep of wings. The further we walked, the more the silence thickened, not empty but full, like water pressing on glass. The chamber opened sudden and vast. Stalactites dripped slow tears, and in the center stood a stone altar, blackened with centuries of smoke. Around it lay bundles, leather pouches, jars sealed with pitch, roots dried to knotted fists. The smell was not decay but memory. Sage, bitterroot, sweetgrass, all mingled as if the breath of healers still lingered. I sank to my knees. My mother's songs rose unbidden, notes breaking in my throat. I touched one bundle, and warmth surged up my arm, a pulse older than my own heart. Ethan stood reverent, hat in hand. "This is no myth," he whispered. "No," I said, "this is survival." But survival is never quiet. From the mouth of the cave came the crunch of boots on ice. Voices echoed low, sharp, certain, Blackthorn, Collins, and others. My stomach clenched. They had followed. Ethan doused the lantern. Darkness fell heavy, but the altar glowed faint, a breath of phosphor rising from the herbs. Blue growled, low thunder in the dark. Blackthorn's voice cut the silence. "Miss Redfeather, I know you're here. The town has no patience for stubborn women hiding behind ghosts. Come out, or we'll smoke you out like foxes." The cave shivered, air alive with echoes. My father's words returned. "The earth chooses who tends it." My blood beat hot in my ears. I pressed my palm to the altar. The glow flared, lighting the chamber in eerie fire. Ethan sucked in breath, awed. The herbs smoked without flame, a sweet, sharp smoke that curled to the roof and rolled outward. From the tunnel came a chorus of coughs, curses, boots scrambling on ice. The spirits themselves seemed to drive Blackthorn back. Ethan caught my arm. "You're bleeding," he whispered. I looked down indeed. The altar had cut my palm, a thin red line feeding the glow. The cave had taken its price. Outside, the retreating hooves clattered against stone, fading into distance. Silence fell heavy again, but not empty. It hummed with power, with warning, with promise. I closed my fist, blood dripping onto the altar. "The valley has chosen," I said, voice shaking but strong. Ethan looked at me not as a stranger, not even as a healer, but as something larger. "And I will stand with what it chose." The cave breathed once more, as if sealing a pact neither of us yet understood. And in that echoing dark, with the taste of iron on my tongue and the scent of sage thick in my lungs, I knew the fight had only begun. By March, the wind came softer, though it still carried knives at dawn. Snowmelt hissed down the coulee, carving black veins through the white. The valley seemed to breathe again, but my chest did not loosen. For every crow that circled above the cottonwoods, I thought of Blackthorn's vow. He would not forgive being turned back by smoke and shadows. Men like him never did. Ethan had healed enough to work the corral. His shoulders moved with a soldier's discipline, but I could see the ache when he thought I wasn't watching. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. Silence had become its own language between us, the kind that said more than words dare. At night, when the lantern burned low, I caught his gaze on me like a question he was afraid to ask. And though I told myself I was stone, I felt the cracks deepening. One evening Yellowbird returned, walking slower, staff tapping the rhythm of his years. He sat by the stove, eyes gleaming in the firelight. "The cave answered because you bled for it," he said. "But blood calls blood. Blackthorn will return with papers, soldiers, rifles that do not cough but spit lightning. The valley cannot be won with herbs alone." Fear pressed cold fingers around my ribs. "Then we are already lost." Yellowbird shook his head. "Not lost, tested. Your father once said the crow do not own the land, we belong to it. If you keep that truth, no man's deed can break you." After he left, Ethan spoke low. "He means we must be ready to fight." I wanted to deny it, to believe that spirits and smoke would be enough. But I remembered Blackthorn's eyes calculating, cruel. "Yes," I whispered, "but fight, how?" The answer came the next week, sudden as thunder. We heard riders before dawn, the ground trembling like a drum. By the time I reached the door, the valley was alive with the glint of rifles. Blackthorn himself rode at the front, Collins beside him, a dozen hired men trailing like shadows. Their breath steamed in the pale light. "Miss Redfeather," Blackthorn's voice rang sharp, "this land is now claimed under federal authority. Step aside, or be removed." Ethan moved before I could, standing tall though pain bent his side. "She will not leave," he called, "and you'll not force her without blood." The men laughed, cruel echoes bouncing off the ridge. I gripped my rifle, hands trembling but steady enough to aim. Behind me, the cave's memory seemed to pulse, whispering that the valley itself was watching. Then the sky broke. A storm of crows, hundreds rose from the trees, black wings blotting out the morning. They circled, crying wild, a sound that clawed at the nerves of men. Horses reared, men cursed. In the chaos, Ethan fired once, a shot cracking through the din. One of Blackthorn's men fell, snow staining red. The standoff shook the air like a heartbeat. Blackthorn's face twisted, rage and fear battling. "This isn't finished," he spat, pulling his horse back. "No woman, no Indian myth will stop progress. I'll bring law. I'll bring soldiers. You'll be buried under the tracks." And then they wheeled away, thunder of hooves fading into distance, leaving silence raw and bleeding. I lowered my rifle, arms heavy as stone. Ethan's hand found mine, rough, trembling. We did not speak. There was no victory in this retreat, only a stay of execution. That night, as we sat by the fire, the weight of it pressed down. I touched the silver pendant at my throat, my mother's, my anchor. "If they return with soldiers, we cannot win," I said. Ethan's eyes met mine, steady as the mountains. Then we run, together. There are other valleys, other rivers. The land is wide, and no law can chain every horizon. I shook my head, torn between duty and desire. But this is my father's earth. My people's songs live here. Then we stay, he said softly, and we make our stand. Even if the world forgets us, we will not forget ourselves.